signs of a conspiracy are cropping up. A conspiracy whose present goal appears to be the destruction of the very possibility of education in the state. Marvin X, a professor at Fresno State College, is on the verge of losing his job because he believes in the construction of a black nation. 24 black students are on trial for almost 2,000 felony charges for having attempted to protest the existence of racism at San Fernando Valley State College. Saul Castro and 2 black teachers are being transferred to all white schools because they sympathize with the demands of the students to make education relevant to the community. And I'd just like to add, if I hadn't been in my class on Monday, if I hadn't had to lecture, I think I would have been right down on the picket line supporting Saul Castro. The regents have fired me because they say I'm a member of the Communist Party. Now, those involved in the conspiracy seem to be either ignorant or outright disdainful of the very process of education. Perhaps they simply haven't had the time with all of their activities and the banks and the corporations to sit down and ask themselves, what is the meaning of education? Now, I want to take a little time out today and discuss that, and I hope it reaches them. Everything else I've said, they seem to somehow have found out about, so I hope they'll listen to this. Now, I think the goal of the educational process is to create human beings who have human concerns, human beings who know and understand themselves and are able to pass human judgments on what's going on around them. Education should not mold the mind according to a prefabricated architectural plan. It should rather liberate the mind. It should liberate the mind from established definitions and plans. The mind has to be liberated merely in order to perceive the world, to see society, to understand what its advantages are, what its disadvantages are. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between political ideas and opinions on the one hand and the educational process on the other. I've been asked over and over again, how can you really be committed to the struggle for liberation and leave your ideas outside of the classroom, leave your political opinions outside of the classroom? Now, I maintain that political opinions should be brought into the classroom. They belong in the classroom. I think that education itself is inherently political. Its goal ought to be political. It ought to create human beings who possess a genuine concern for their fellow human beings and who will use the knowledge they acquire in order to conquer nature, but to conquer nature for the purpose of freeing man from enslaving necessities. But I'd like to leave this for a moment and talk a little bit about another kind of politicalization of education. The university has become political in a very overt sense. It's become political as far as politics are defined by the controlling political apparatus in this country. No one, I don't think, can deny the fact that universities continually receive research grants from the government which are directly related to defense. Research grants which force the scholar to develop more efficient means of, for example, furthering the war in Vietnam. This is a politicalization of the university. We've had to put up a very hard and long struggle, and we continue to wage that struggle just in order to bring more black and Chicano students and faculty into the university. The fact that a few years ago there were very, very few blacks and Chicanos on the campus, I think points to the fact that the university is political. It was political in its very acceptance of the racism which exists in this society. Now, perhaps this isn't the outright assertion that black and brown people are inferior to whites and for this reason shouldn't be allowed to enter into the sacred doors of education. Now, the kind of racism that's at work in the educational system is far less overt, but it's far more harmful. It's far more harmful because of the difficulty we have in pinpointing it. Now, how does institutional racism, and this is institutional racism we're talking about, affect the university? Now, I think there's certain requirements and standards which are supposedly maintained by the university. I don't know, what is it? You have to get a B average in order to be accepted, and you have to have certain academic courses during your high school years in order to be brought into the university. Now, at first, this kind of a requirement seems to be completely neutral. But let's put it into the context of what's happening in high schools, which are predominantly black and brown, and let's analyze it there. Some research work was done by some friends of mine in San Diego, where in high schools, where the student population is predominantly black or brown. Now, first of all, what they found was that students there were continually encouraged to take vocational programs and not to enter into the academic courses. They were told that they'd never get to college anyway, so why waste their time working in an academic course of study when they really ought to be preparing themselves to go out and get a job when they finished high school? Now, this isn't even to mention the quality of the education which black and brown students get in this state and this society. Now, what was the result of this research that I'm talking about? They found that the black and brown students who, according to the standards and requirements of the University of California, that only about 3%, and I think actually the number was smaller than that, were actually qualified, quote, qualified enough even in order to be considered by the admissions office for admission into the university. Now, the number of students who actually get in, that's another question. And then we talk about establishing new standards. We talk about things like potential rather than actual achievement, because the occasion for actual achievement has not yet been created in this country, in the high schools and the ghettos. Now, when we say that we want to establish new standards, a lot of people in the university cry out and say that this is an institution for the elite. This is an institution designed to create the future leaders of our society. Therefore, we can't afford to lower our standards. Nobody had ever said anything about lowering standards. They interpret new standards as a lowering of their standards. Now, this is what institutional racism is. This is the kind of racism that's not immediately visible. This is a kind of racism that we have to fight. This is a kind of politicalization of the university which has to be neutralized. Now, just about a week ago, right here in Los Angeles, some really tragic results of a survey were released. And the results were that students in the Los Angeles ghetto schools cannot read. They are far below the average norm. Now, this is a part of the conspiracy that I'm talking about. When these students reach college, they will have been totally eliminated from those who are qualified to attend the university. And of course, the reason for refusing them entrance won't be because they're black or brown, but because they aren't qualified. Because, according to the neutral statement, that they have to satisfy certain qualifications, certain requirements, certain standards, they will not be allowed to participate in the so-called sacred activities of education. Now, maybe things like high potential programs can be set up, but we have to understand that this does not attack the root of the problem. And I'm not trying to put down the high potential program. I think it's very good, but the fact is that it accepts the existence of racism, it accepts this kind of institutional racism, and it tries to work within that framework. It's not going to attack the conspiracy against education. Now, I said a little earlier that I think that education ought to be political, that it's inherently political in another sense, not in the way that I've outlined the negative political nature of the university in this day and age. Now, I want to read a quote from Herbert Marcuse's latest book, An Essay on Liberation, and I think he puts it very well. He says, "What appears as extraneous politicalization of the university by disrupting radicals today, as it was so often in the past, the logical internal dynamic of education, translation of knowledge into reality, of humanistic values into humane conditions of existence, denial of the right of political activity in the university, perpetuates the separation between theoretical and practical reason, and reduces the effectiveness and the scope of intelligence."